Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. So, Russ, we are rapidly approaching this year's conference. For people that are still unfamiliar with it, because they've been living on Mars, give us the mission and the purpose behind the conference. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? What's the goal?
Okay, so when we started doing this back in sort of 2009, 2010, it was to bring together people specifically in the London area to try and establish what represents best practice and plagiarise and nick good ideas from each other. And that was basically in a pub holding hands, just discussing how difficult our job was. And it sort of grew from there. And at the same time, I was running the Southeast IFE CPD program. Mm-hmm. And so I was getting used to organising events and bringing in expert speakers on relevant subjects. So I had a bit of a sort of, that was my apprenticeship, if you like. And so after a period of time, it became more formal. And we started introducing a number of speakers. We started then having people travelling from abroad to come to our events, and that's the sort of the genesis of it, if you will. Mm-hmm. The purpose now is to bring together people and have presentations on a wide range of subjects, all relating to high-rise fire safety, so that we can get all the stakeholders in one room. So an ideal audience for me would include architects, fire engineers, insurance people, equipment manufacturers, firefighters, building managers, security professionals, FMs, because they're all coming at this from slightly different directions, and we need that sort of cross-fertilisation of experience. And I see this way, but you see it that way. You design and build it like this, but actually when we try and run it and operate it, it doesn't work like that. So it's that lived experience that meets the building design conceptual. That's the thing. And then adding to that mix, we try and get as many presentations from outside of the UK. So we try not to be parochial in just talking about stuff in England, because I think that was a contributing factor to where we got to. So so the mission
might be a good bit just for us to expand on for a second, because like you say, I think people might be seeing the title for this episode, perhaps, Tall Buildings Fire Safety Conference, and think we're going to have an hours-long conversation about Grenfell. Now, we may jump in and out and allude to it, but I think there'd be more benefit if you could just tap dance around for us and give us some snippets, some examples of some international cases that you're aware of where the assumptions of what should have happened perhaps didn't materialise. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
Yeah, so the reality is, if you look outside the UK boundaries, there have been multi-fatality fires in recent months and years.
So this isn't just an us problem?
No. So at our US conference this year, we had a big case study of the Twin Parks fire in the Bronx. Okay. For example, we've had the fire in Istanbul with 20 odd.
Talk us through these a little bit, one at a time. Just give us a minute or so on each. So what happened in the Bronx?
The Bronx was an electrical fire. We know that the majority of fires that start in high rise start with an electrical fault or problem, which is now obviously exaggerated with obviously lithium-ion batteries and scooters and that kind of stuff. So that was a high-rise residential block. The occupant left their flat, left the front door open. There was a number of problems with the internal fire doors, so smoke flooded the whole building, and yeah, it was a multi-fatality fire, and caused a lot of soul searching in sort of the New York area, etc. But since then, we've had a fire in Istanbul, which was a fire in a basement, which was a nightclub. This was during the day, and there was a fire. It was a construction site. It was a refurb, but the fire then broke out, permeated the rest of the building where there were people in there. It was during the day. Again, another multi-fatality fire. So, these things, if you look at it from a worldwide perspective, these things obviously are happening at regular intervals, but I'm not sure that each country necessarily looks outside its own borders. No. So one of the missions of the conference, getting back to your first question, one of the missions of the conference is that shared learning, challenges, because we do have people saying, let's take, for example, the single staircase issue, which is now possibly resolved. Since I've been running this, I've had colleagues from other countries saying, how can you possibly allow this to happen?
So just expand on that for people that aren't familiar with what the single staircase issue is, because again, they will be conditioned to a UK mindset and thinking, well, this is the same as it is everywhere because this is how we build tall buildings.
Yeah, right. So under what was current guidance, so if you think of things like British Standard 991 or 9999, that allows you, the guidance in there allows you to build single stair residential building as high as you like. So, for example, in London we have a high-rise residential building, 52 floors with a single staircase.
Wow.
Now, when I mention this to colleagues from other countries, they said it's madness. We've never allowed that for that kind of height to have.
For a member of the public, help us understand what the problem is with that. I only need one staircase. I'm not that fat. I'm just I need to get up and down the staircase. What's the problem with that?
The problem, as far as I'm concerned, is that's done because we've operated a stay put, remain in place policy. So, in other words, unless you're affected by fire, you stay in your flat. That's where you're safest to be. So, if you're inside your fire compartment box, then you're safer to stay in there than to venture out and to try and escape. Two significant problems with that concept. Firstly, a lot of buildings that have been built in the last 20 years have not been built well, so it's not a fireproof box. We get smoke permeating and spreading around, etc., etc. And secondly, we've got this phenomenon now of social media-induced evacuations. So if you're sitting in a residential block and all of a sudden your phone goes bing, and somebody says, "Do you know there's a fire in the building?" Even though you haven't got a fire detection system potentially, but somebody in another flat says, "Do you know there's a fire in the building?" And so we've seen.
And you're flooded with fears of getting stuck on the 42nd floor with your two children, and your immediate reaction is, "Look, we don't know how bad this is or this isn't, but let's just get out." So the single staircase concept works under the assumption that the only people utilising that staircase are going to be first responders and the fire and rescue service in their efforts with their equipment and their bridgeheads and their procedures. That's enough space for them because that's what they need. But then when you add on top of that self-evacuation, hysteria, panic, and members of the public trying to escape as that route of egress, that becomes terrible because, all the smoke that starts flooding into that single staircase and people just causing panic, delaying our priorities, causing that fog of war in that mass evacuation. And that's when, everything starts to spiral, I suppose.
And it's aggravated by goodwill gestures. So you get neighbours, running up and down corridors, banging on doors, saying there's a fire in the building, because they think that's the right thing to do.
Of course, they're trying to save the neighbours.
And so what you then get is people all descending that staircase. Now that is the only staircase of which firefighters. Now we know from Grenfell that the firefighting lift didn't work correctly. Yep. So firefighters were ascending the stairs. We've now got contraflow. They're establishing a bridgehead, so we're running charged hose all up, and so we've now turned this staircase into an assault course.
Very, very technical question, and feel free if we don't have this freely to hand. What's the mandated width for these staircases? Do you know how big does a staircase actually have to be? Because I find there's quite a good bit of variation in high-rise premises that I visit. This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA connected firefighter platform. Now back to the show.
Yeah, so the logical path of this is you work out how many occupants are in the building, and then you calculate the stairs accordingly. Are you with me?
Yep.
Now that's generally how you do it for most other buildings, but again, in residential blocks, you're only really anticipating the occupants of the flat on fire and perhaps one or two other.
So is that what they base their calculation on?
That's what they base their calculations on.
Right.
Now, what I can tell you is if you've got to carry anybody down or move anybody down, I don't know. A good friend of mine was a senior officer at Grenfell Tower, and he's a big guy, 6'4", kind of size, for firefighters. But with the BA set on, and he said his shoulders were almost touching either side of the staircase as he was going up the stairs. So if you then put into that a line of charged hose, fill it with smoke, I'm sure your listeners can probably work that out for themselves, that it's a difficult. So the point is that there is evidence now that people are not staying put, they're not remaining in place, they're trying to leave, they're going to leave.
Yep.
And if the lift's not working, which is another issue, we have. I've been trying and asking lots of social housing providers to let me know what is their current failure rate of their lifts in terms of not working. It's not a popular question.
I bet that information is not readily.
But
they don't have it to hand, or they're very reticent to give it to you.
I think the most telling comment I had was a recent conference in the States when the fire chief from Las Vegas, which is obviously a popular tourist destination, and he said their starting proposition when they turn up at a fire in a high-rise resi or hotel is that none of the equipment works. That's their starting proposition. So, which is quite an indictment. But I'm sure that many of your listeners that are firefighters have turned up at buildings expecting certain things to work, and they don't work. So you improvise, you adapt and overcome, which is what we're trained. What firefighters are trained to do. But so that's the issue for me in
I went to one recently where the riser box at the bottom, we were just testing it. And we just it was a charged riser, put a length on it and just to run a bit of water out of it, see how it ran. And the branch wasn't operating very well. And when we pulled it off, there was so much rubbish and stuff that had been put into this riser outlet. So when we'd switched it on, everything that started pumping out of it, there was just so much residue and shit. And I know I've heard stories of people finding needles in them blocking up the end of branches and all this sort of stuff, because especially when it's a dry riser, people do post stuff in them.
Yeah, it's one of the tests that doesn't really get done. And good colleague that Brent Brooks, he talks about this, which is one of the reasons why we advocate smoothbore branches for high-rise firefighting, because the internal diameter of dry and wet riser standpipes in the States suffers from a thing called tuberculation, which is basically it's the internal diameter reducing because the metal is eroding, corroding, etc. So you end up with these large flakes, plus other debris that you might get in there. Now, if you've got a normal hand control branch and you're about to make entry into a flat and you go in there, you might well find that within a very short space of time that the flow rate is significantly reduced because it's congested with debris. So,
well, it'll have a complex design at the end of the branch, which is designed to dissipate the cone and then bring it back to the center with the dividing veins and all this sort of stuff. And it's a very, very technical, complex branch. And I'm sure in a perfect scenario in the factory when you tested it, it was really great and you could study the droplet sizes and all that jazz. But you only need to start getting, like you say, some of that oxidized or the damaged stuff from the internal riser. And all of a sudden, all of that great technological innovation is useless.
Yeah, and I know Brent demonstrates this. He puts sunflower seeds into it to try and replicate what you're going to do if you get a blockage. Because clearly, if you're in up close and personal, and all of a sudden you lose 50% of your water, it's your effectiveness is it's more than halved. It puts you in a pretty tricky situation. So.
Take us back to the international example. Sorry, I dragged you off down a rabbit hole.
No, it's fine. And we've had other fires in China that we know where electric bikes have caught fire in the basement ground floor area and flooded the staircases with smoke, leading again to multi-fatality fires. So I try and keep a handle as best I can from colleagues around the world on high-rise fires that are occurring. So I would say, and this is broad brush, but we're having a serious high-rise fire somewhere in the world about every 6 weeks. So, but of course, you're talking about a global sort of thing. So, and of course, we're always going to have fires, but we need to learn from these, and we need to look outside our own borders. So, for me, the great thing about the conference is that we get international speakers in and say, "This is how we do it." So, a great example of that is almost off the bat, we've been talking about door curtains and the use of door curtains.
Okay.
And God, his name's gone out of my head now. Dr.
Michael Reich.
Michael Reich, thank you. He came to one of our first conferences and said, "Look, you should be using door curtains," and everybody sort of looked and said, "We've never used them. What are they?" And of course, now it's kind of quite widespread. Use of those. So
put one on the compartment of origin, put one on the hallway, put one on the stairs.
Perfect. And now it's
really quick to deploy. Fantastic. Reducing that ventilation profile, sustaining some of the compartmentation. It's a fantastic, simple design, which I think has been a real game changer.
So I'm not claiming that we were instrumental in doing that, but I think we played a part in bringing that to this event.
Definitely.
Smoke hoods. And things like that. So that's the point of going back to the first question. The point of it is to try and bring as many voices in, look at some topical subjects, look at some topical solutions, but not just from the UK, from around the globe, and provide a forum where people can come together and talk to colleagues from other industries, architects, etc., get them in the room. And that's why you'll see we've adopted this kind of a magazine format. Yep. So we used to cluster them over in days. So day one would be about fire engineering, day two would be about fire safety management, and day three would be about firefighting. And guess what? On day one, we'd have the room full of fire engineers, and day two, we'd have the room full of building managers, and day three, it'd be full of firefighters, and all the rest.
And you perpetuate that silo thinking accidentally.
So I've deliberately mixed it up now, so people say, well, hang on a minute, 1 minute you're talking about this, and the next minute you're talking about that. So it's been done deliberately. It's been done.
Because you need a holistic understanding of this complex problem.
Yeah, so I want somebody to sit through potentially a presentation which they probably think they've got no interest in, but then they'll think, hang on a minute, that's relevant, or I should know about that. Are you with me?
The team here at the podcast are extremely excited to announce our brand new partnership with Patrol Store UK. Patrol Store has been serving the UK's police, fire and emergency communities and first responder sector since 2008, providing leading brands such as Hikes, Magnum, 511, Nebo, Opzulu, Highlander, AKU and many, many more of our favourites. They are now also supplying bespoke uniform, PPE and station workwear to fire services around the UK. So for all our listeners that are part of your USAR, your HART team, your ISAR team, your armed response teams, your fire investigation, your NALO, your HAZMAT and all of the training departments that have got your own budgets, be sure to get the absolute best for your team at a realistic price by contacting Aaron and the team at Patrol Store and referencing the Firefighters podcast. Patrol Store will also be taking part in our listener competition giveaways, as well as providing unique discounts to podcast listeners. So for people that are always asking about Hikes boots as an example, that is one unique discount code that is coming to you very soon through Patrol Store. We've also got some incredible bags. I mean, the Opzulu bags are a game changer. So you know the really Gucci and expensive tactical black bags that everyone's using in CrossFit workouts and taking to the gym and taking to stations? Well, they've basically got that, but it's made better and costs less, because they're not slapping some Gucci expensive brand name on it and it's giving you what you want on a first responder salary. Be sure to keep your eyes in the notes of the episodes for links to unique offers and discount codes. And if you're looking to buy well and buy once, be sure to get in the notes and head over to Patrol Store UK. Now back to the show.
So take us through some of the voices, some of the speakers, some of the subjects, and try and give us a whistle-stop tour, kind of a teaser of some of the information that's going to be shared at this year's conference.
Okay, so it's 3 days, starting on the 2nd of Monday, the 2nd of December, 3rd and 4th of December at London's Excel. It's part of FireX, which again is part of a rebranding exercise called Anticipate London. So the exhibition floor has got huge things with security, health and safety, FM, etc. But there is a section called FireX but we're in a mezzanine floor above that. So this is a proper seated auditorium. It's not in the exhibition floor with all the noise and distractions. So this is we've got a really strong lineup. Starts off with Jim Glockling, who is presenting a new guidance document on managing risk for living walls as cladding, so green walls, which is becoming more popular. So the insurance industry have now generated a new guidance document, and Jim is presenting that.
Green walls. Expand on that for a little bit for me. So
green walls is very, if I can say, in the architectural world, very de rigueur at the moment, because it obviously gives I hesitate to use the word greenwashing a building, but it obviously gives it green credentials, because you look at it and it's covered in greenery, be that vines, plants, bushes, whatever else it was. I was lucky enough to be in Italy recently and visited the Bosco Verticale, which is widely recognised as the first green tall building. So this is a high-rise building which is completely green on the outside. The roof and all 4 walls are completely covered in shrubs, trees, vines, bushes, etc. So
actually naturally growing ones?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
So, and that's becoming more trendy. So you're going to see a lot more buildings now that are going to have hanging gardens down the side of the building at height, all down the side.
So I'm assuming they're also installed with some sort of external drencher to feed them all the time.
Yes, that's right. But, people in our industry are going to say, what happens when there's a hosepipe bang? What happens when there's a water shortage and these things dry out? Because some of them are sitting in plastic plant holders. So we're stripping off the combustible cladding on one side of a building, and on the other side of the building we're putting on plastic plant holders and full of greenery and shrubbery. So because
I can see that. We've got a wildfire on the side of the high rise.
Yeah, interestingly, in Australia, where this has become popular, they've seen an increase now in spider bites. So if you want, because
they'll attract all sorts of.
You bring nature into your building, which it keeps the building cooler. It gives a sense of well-being. There's lots of positives with this. I don't want to be completely negative about it, but let's have a conversation about what does that mean for firefighters if I'm going to cover it.
Yeah, you've got to be careful sometimes bringing that aspirational goal of making it in keeping with the surroundings and not big, tall, ugly grey buildings, and going, okay, but what's realistic and what's safe? And I'm sure they are. God forbid we're having a conversation in the next 5 years about how this has contributed to a disaster. But okay, that's green walls, and we're seeing the proliferation of that across other.
It's certainly becoming and green roofs. So go up high in London. Or any
Sky
other
Gardens,
city, really, and look down, and you'll notice that there's a lot more greenery now on the roofs of buildings. And we don't really talk about the roof. We've talked about cladding, but what's on the roof of most buildings? Plant rooms, telecom aerials, and things like that. So it is an area that if you were sent up there to fight a fire, there are some innate hazards. I mean, the obvious one is edge protection once you get up onto the roof. But if you've got a plant room up there, if you've got, as I know in several buildings in London, you've got transmitting telecoms arrays, which give you dangerous levels potentially if you get in their way. So those are the kind of issues But so Jim's talking about that. He's followed by a presentation from the Smoke Control Association on construction of smoke shafts in buildings. So
smoke shafts and intubescent seals and guards and separation of ventilation, is that?
Yeah, because architects don't want to provide the space for natural ventilation because it's much bigger. So there has been a movement to fan-assisted shafts to provide ventilation where required. So, and there's obviously we know from experience there's some common mistakes that can be made when those things are installed. and how they operate when they're in fire conditions. So delighted we've got Ian Doncaster from the Smoke Control Association who's going to be going through the do's and don'ts of designing and installing smoke shafts in buildings.
Okay.
That's going to be followed by a presentation by...
I remember hearing one about a restaurant in London. I think one of our previous guests, actually, there was a restaurant on the ground floor or something like that, and they were getting smoke spread on something like the 5th and 7th floors or something like that, because rather than doing it externally, for some godly unknown reason, the restaurant had a full vertical shaft put all the way through the building, I think it was. You may or may not recall this one. I don't know what exactly the name of the incident was, but yeah, the external the shaft for the exhaustion of gases from this restaurant went right up the centre of the building. And
that's not uncommon. So that's a kitchen extract system.
Yeah,
which will probably go up on the roof because they want to discharge.
Yeah, but surely it's a waste of space as well internally to force that thing up through the middle of everything.
There's many reasons why, if it's a prestigious building, they don't want ventilation on the external part of the building.
No, they don't want a big ugly shaft going up the side of it.
No.
But that the maintenance of that, the separation within it, if it has build up and whatnot, how that gets maintained.
Well, I got the job at British Airports Authority on the back of the Burger King fire at Terminal 1 in Heathrow, which was a dirty kitchen extract system. So I made a career at
Burger King. Can't imagine why.
Yeah, I made a career at
any fast food restaurant, we should say.
So ventilation, smoke shaft, do's and don'ts, they're really important. I mean, my thing here is that of all the building managers that I train, and I do around the world, the least understood system in their building is the smoke control solution.
Okay.
They simply don't understand it. And even the building engineer who works in the building, you say, can you tell me, is it a pressurization system or a depressurization system? What's that? What's the difference? And there's some fundamental stuff. So if we can unpack that a bit at the conference, then I'm happy. Mm-hmm. That's going to be followed by a presentation by a company called Ambar Kelly, who are one of our sponsors this year, and they're doing it's fire stopping of service shafts and other vertical shafts going up and down through the building. So
fire stopping of service shafts. Okay, yep.
Anywhere where you've got
shafts historically are places where we do a lot of retrospective changes. When you get new things put in, you get Wi-Fi on this level, there's an issue with the gas or the server, so that gets interacted with and manipulated a lot through the life cycle of that building, doesn't it, as services change and require upgrading and all that sort of jazz. And every time an upgrade is done, there's an interaction with the separation within it, isn't there?
Yeah, it's ironic that there was a fire in Madrid, the Windsor Tower fire. It was a few years ago now. But one of the main mechanisms of that fire grew was convected heat up the the wet riser shaft.
Convected heat through the wet riser shaft.
So you had a fire on a lower floor.
Yeah.
The fire and heat spread throughout the building horizontally, went into the wet riser shaft where the wet riser was running up the hot, and it was completely uncompartmented. So you've now got that convected heat going up the wet riser shaft
in that steel shaft,
coming through on a number of floors because the doors were faulty and not shut, etc. And now you've got fire spreading out through the building through a life safety conduit running through the building. So the irony.
Wow, there must have been some serious heat going on there. Jesus.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, if you Google it, it was a significant collapse, and it was like a towering inferno type fire. It's a massive fire.
Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial and fire training professionals. Now, next up, and widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection. This is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. Now back to the show.
That's followed by a presentation from Siderize. Good friend of mine, Srini, is doing facade fire safety. So it's obviously something that's a permanent theme in the conference, that we're looking for innovation in facade fire safety, facade fire testing, and Siderize produce a lot of products that go in the gap between the floor slab and the facade. So their product is...
Stupid question, but again, I don't want to get people lost in terminology. The facade of the building.
Yes.
We're talking about external cladding or external surfaces or things like that. Just talk to us about a little bit around how those two connect with the building and why it could be an issue. Why do we need to be talking about this?
Okay, so the facade is the most expensive element of a tall building. It's the most complex, and it's the most expensive bit that you're going to put on your building is the facade. Because if you use... Typically, at the moment, we use a thing called slip form construction. So we run up a concrete shaft up the centre, and then we run outriggers from that, and then we pour concrete and pour floors. So that gives you a kind of a central column, a central shaft with the floors, but then onto which we then need to then connect a facade system to keep out rain, weather, and make the building look lovely and sexy.
Yep.
Now, in the past, we would put the facade in between the floors, so the facade rested on the slab. Are you with me?
Yep.
Okay, so that's quite old technology now. Now what you'll do is the facade itself is freestanding and will bear its own weight, and you'll bolt that to the slab. That's generally how
it bears its entire vertical weight.
The majority of it bears itself on its own steel frame structure that it's slotted into. So if you take curtain wall, for example, those glass cassettes that drop into that, they sit on top of one another, so that they're largely bearing their own weight.
Oh, wow. And you're just attaching it to the external.
Then you attach it to the slab.
So it's not load-bearing on every floor?
Well, partially it's load-bearing, and it depends on the building. But I'm making a generalisation. But what you end up with is a gap between the floor slab and the facade. Now, if you're talking about a very tall building, then clearly they're going to move. And in some cases, it can be metres in high wind that they're going to sway. So that fire stopping...
That's not remotely disconcerting.
That fire stopping in between the slab and the curtain wall has got to have the ability to compress and decompress and not lose its fire safety integrity. And it's also got to work in the winter, in the height of winter and the height of summer. So it could be...
that's the thing about a tall building, isn't it? You're almost interacting with 3 or 4 different types of environment as you go up the height, because the way they interact with the environment, the general temperature of day to day, the influence of the wind. You're operating in 3 or 4 environments, aren't you, as you go up it, I suppose?
Yeah, Siderize have got a great video with one of their fire stopping products, which is effectively sandwiched between the facade and the slab, and they compress it hundreds and hundreds of times during testing to make sure that it will expand and contract a number of times through different ambient heat temperatures to make sure that it works. So that's Srini. Then we've got another sponsor, Girder Security, are doing fire doors in HRBs, higher risk buildings. Where are we? So there's quite a lot of misunderstanding at the moment about the role of fire doors. I mean, not their fundamental role in stopping fire spread, but who's responsible for them and when they should be tested, what constitutes a fire door. These are questions that some people are grappling with at the moment. So I'm hoping that presentation from Fiona Critchley is going to answer a lot of those questions.
As in, just to expand on how that would manifest itself, when fire doors fail, and then we're stood retrospectively pointing at who's been in charge of the maintenance contract of that door, and the manufacturers point at the building manager and the building manager points at somebody else, and no one's actually been checking it, or the person whose responsibility it is to maintain it doesn't know how to maintain it, so they've not really been doing it.
Classic example is in a high-rise resi block with the right to buy scheme. If you want to buy your own flat under the right to buy scheme, it's not uncommon for people to sort of announce that to the world by changing their front door. So where you've got a standard...
Yeah, I want everybody to know I've paid for this.
So instead of having a standard social housing front door, you then go out and you purchase a door, a Neo-Georgian with cat flap and door knocker to boot, etc., etc. And we did have a long debate about, who owned that front door vis-a-vis the sort of common parts of a building. That's quite clear now. There is an inferred duty of care on the person living in the flat or apartment that they have to make sure that fire door is fit for purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I say, if you decide to cut a cat flap in a fire door, it's not a fire door anymore.
True.
Amendments or anything else like that. So, but I think who's testing it, how are they being tested is an issue. But
that's a very complex problem, isn't it? When you say within the building that you manage, everyone else has now got ownership of a variety of bits, and you can't, when you cross that person's threshold, you're in a man's house, and excuse the sexism within that, but there's different laws around that, isn't it? And you can't impose things on people's personal property.
No, and crossing, you can't go into somebody's, even if it's a social housing apartment, you can't go in there willy-nilly. You can't just go in there and say, hang on, what are you doing about fire safety in here? Is there a problem? It's quite a difficult thing to do. So without getting too far off the subject of fire doors, if we've got something like a hoarder, if you've got somebody hoarding, getting into that hoarding flat and sorting that issue out, because it's a mental health issue, it's not just a lazy person issue, is not an easy thing to do in the UK, because you've got a right to live in what's called quiet contentment, which basically means you can't go barging into somebody's flat or apartment willy-nilly. Yeah. So it's
you've got a feel for building managers, haven't you? That's got to be bloody hard.
It is if if you've got a hoarder or somebody who's exhibiting reckless behaviour, which like having barbecues on balconies and stuff like that. It's a tricky one to resolve, but so that's and then we've got CTEC who are talking about 8629 fire alarm systems for use by the fire service when they turn up.
Okay.
So if firefighters turn up at a block of flats and it's fitted with one of these systems, what that means is that they can put that floor into fire, they can set off an alarm. It's not a detection system, it's a manual system for setting off alarms on various floors, so that if you want
you can do, so that's when you want to move to a phased evacuation, you can start evacuating and setting alarms off on certain floors and do it in a more strategic manner and have stairwell protection teams available on the 9th floor, because we're going to evacuate the 9th now. Right, clear, we're going to move to the 10 and 11 now, whatever.
If the building's not behaving itself and you've now got smoke emerging on a number of floors, or it's permeating through wherever, riser shafts or something like that, and you've now got smoke emerging on a number of floors, then you may make the decision that you're going to go, instead of just going for the room of origin or floor of origin, you're going to take 5 floors out. Now, how do you do that quickly without sending off a bunch of firefighters knocking on doors saying, get out?
Yeah.
Knocking on the doors in breathing apparatus, looking like Darth Vader, knocking on the doors saying, you've got to leave. Yeah. So that's the morning of day one. The afternoon of day one starts with Ben Levy, high-rise lead for the National Fire Chiefs Council. Great guy. I know you know him. He's going to be talking about the latest stuff that the NFCC are working on.
Nice.
In relation to high-rise. Then we've got our first international speaker, Captain Mohammed Al-Anai from Abu Dhabi Civil Defence, and he's going to be talking about what they're working on in Abu Dhabi. They
are throwing high rises up fast out there, aren't they?
They are, and they've got a lot of experience of dealing with high rise fires. So,
does that mean they're good at it, or does that just mean they've got a lot of experience with them?
I think they've had more opportunities to learn than some other places. Let me be diplomatic about it.
Very well put. And we can shortcut that, again, with this shared information. We haven't got to learn the same lessons. We can listen to what they've done about it.
No, absolutely.
If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drill Book. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, knots and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show.
Final presentation on that day is from Julie Butterworth and Andy Fry, and they're from an organisation called TPAS. They're the country's leading organisation in relation to tenant engagement. So they teach and they have great guidance documents for how you engage with tenants, not just on fire, but all aspects. It could be maintenance, it could be anything.
Because that's the complicated factor, isn't it? When these issues start to emerge, you need to already have a foundation of a good relationship with your tenants, so they trust that what you're saying is what they need to hear and they're going to comply with it, because the human factor is the most complex element really when it comes to these things, or it should be the most complex element. Putting the fire out or interacting with the building should be relatively set, standardized guidance. This is the way we do it. We know what we're doing. The human factor and anyone visiting them at that time will be the very complex element, and that will be the bit that's really spoken about in the news, because they'll be the ones that do or don't get out.
It's really important, and they've written some great guidance which I think has been adopted in a number of places for overcoming that issue about how do we get the occupants to be on, playing their part by telling us about shortcomings of the building, because, without going through the Grenfell thing too much again, they were complaining about stuff for years and years and years and simply weren't listened to. And then we finish off each day with a question time, and I'm delighted that this year's question time panel includes Sir Ken Knight, Colin Todd, which some of your listeners will know, Gary Strong, who's fire lead for the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, Monica Harrison, who's the safety director at Canary Wharf, and Professor Ed Gallier from Greenwich University. So it's
wow, that's some heavy hitters. Colin Todd's written some good books, hasn't he?
Colin Todd has been one of the stalwarts in the UK fire safety industry. Proud Scotsman, but he's. I'm
going to get him on the podcast. He is going to be a fantastic conversation. I'd love to speak to Colin.
He's not shy in giving you his opinion on a number of things.
We love some opinions. Let's have some opinions, and just to share it. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about, if we don't hear these lessons, then we're doomed to repeat them.
So that's day one, which I think is good. Day two, we're starting with an architect, Paul Busey. And he's going to give an architect's view of the two stair issues that we were discussing earlier on. So he's worked closely with the Royal Institute of Architects on this subject, and he's going to say how it can be this issue can be dealt with at the design stage. Following him, Charles White, who's from a company called HydroShoot, he's going to give us the latest innovations on high-rise refuge chutes. So in many high-rise buildings, the way that you get rid of your rubbish is you go to a central core, open a flap, and you chuck your rubbish down, and it goes down into a bin in the basement. And I think all firefighters are familiar with when you get a fire down in the basement, and then it comes back up that.
That was actually one of the original motivations for Michael Reich. Was a building that he attended that had a fire in the refuse, and it had smoke spread on multiple floors. That's what gave him, I believe, and I may be failing my memory there, but I'm very confident that was one of the initial big motivators where he was like, we haven't got an answer for this.
Yeah, and I saw a video at the US conference in April of a fire in Surfers Paradise on the Gold Coast in Australia. So this is Australia's tallest building, 300 metres. Fire in the refuse area on the basement. Fire went back up the refuge chute and burnt the rubber seals on the doors on each floor. So this building, which is designed for very limited evacuation, the whole building went into simultaneous. With people walking down. So refuge chutes, they're common, and we have to understand how they're designed. And so Charles is going to be doing that, which is great. I'm pleased to say we've got Carol Lambert from Belgium.
Carol is fantastic. He's very funny.
So he's doing a presentation which is called Murphy Visits Brussels, and I'm assuming that's Murphy's Law Visits Brussels.
Yeah.
The story of a high-rise, an older high-rise building fire. So I'm looking forward to that because I know you've spoken to him, but I haven't spoken to him face-to-face.
Mate, you'll love Carol. Bilingual, incredibly knowledgeable, very, very well-educated, very solid grasp of physics, and just the way he relates it as a communicator always comes across very well. I'm very looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah, so and then followed Adam Briggs, who's the fire safety lead for Citizen Housing Group. Now, one of the things you have to produce now for an HRB, a higher risk building, is a safety case. So this is a requirement. And so some of the early adopters that were asked to prepare these safety cases have now submitted them to the building safety regulator. And Adam's going to be walking us through how they did that and the process and telling us the sort of trials and tribulations of preparing a safety case. So I think that's going to be really interesting. The afternoon session is going to be chaired by Kizzy Augustine from Mishcon de Rea. She's a lawyer dealing in this sector, so she's going to be chairing the session. The first speaker, the keynote, is Ben Blackwood, and he's the lead fire engineer for Ballymore Developments. Significant property developer in London, certainly in Canary Wharf.
A lot of influence.
Yep. The next one is Elspeth Grant, and she's going to be talking about the controversial subject of the status of PEEPs, personal emergency evacuation plans in higher risk buildings. So she's been very much at the vanguard of challenging the government on the requirement to do this in high-rise residential, because I'm sure your listeners know that in high-rise residential in the UK, we don't have the same facilities as we would do in a business building, things like refuges, for example. So,
well, I think you shone a light on it, and I think it maybe came out in the first inquiry where it was one of the worst cases of not even elitism, but, you know, just a complete disregard for people of lower mobility and the lack of preparedness for their personal evacuation plans.
And again, this is anecdotal, but I was talking to somebody who was at the Dagenham fire in London a little while ago. And apparently there were a couple of people in that building who were in hospital type beds with cannulas in, receiving intravenous drugs, oxygen therapy. Now, if you're a firefighter and you're confronted with, you go into a flat and you want them to evacuate and you're confronted with that, what are you going to do?
Close the door, make sure there's protection on it, try and stop the fire from getting to them. But like you say, if you've already moved to that, we've recognised the building is failing. Oh, God. Right, send another 2 teams up there. We need strops. And we're just going to have to unplug everything and do the best we can. Maybe get a heart team up there, or just let the paramedics on the ground know we're going to be bringing someone down who's already in critical care. And they need to be, if they make it down, they need to be priority.
So the strategic issue for me is, this new government has stated that they want to move healthcare out of hospitals into the community. Now, the reality for that, for us, for firefighters, is there's going to be a lot more people in buildings with a lot more higher medical needs.
Yeah.
Oxygen therapy. So you go to a high-rise building now, 1 in 5 of us has got a disability, 1 in 4 in urban settings. Of those people, you could go to a building and there could be several people there who are receiving oxygen therapy. So as a firefighter, the reality is you could have oxygen in the building. What does that mean to the fire? So anyway,
there's lots of little bombs put inside these flats, basically.
So after Elspeth, which I think will be a really controversial subject, Conor Logan from Colt ventilation is going to be doing. He's on one of the panel that's rewriting 9991 for high-rise residential. So he's going to be giving us an overview of what's going to change in the new edition of that, which is due out. And again, lots of controversial stuff in that, I'm told. I don't know. We've then got Oliver Sapsford, who's a firefighter in London, but he's doing a PhD into crisis command decision making. So
Oliver's coming on the podcast.
Is he? Great stuff.
Yeah.
So he's doing an overview of his studies. That's followed by the day 2 question time, where we've got Claire Norman, who's fire safety lead in Hammersmith and Fulham, Adam Briggs from Citizen Housing, Fiona Critchley, and Ian Moore, who's the CEO of the Fire Industry Association. So that's going to be specifically targeted at just the social housing environment. Okay, so that's day 2. You worn out yet?
Brother, we've got a right team of Avengers here. It's incredible. I don't think people are going to have big enough notepads.
Day 3, keynote is Professor Paul Christensen.
Yeah.
Electric vehicle lead advisor.
Had Paul on a couple of times. People will be familiar with Paul. Absolute wealth of knowledge.
So he came to our last conference. We videoed his presentation, and as of this morning, his presentation's had 131,000 views.
Yeah.
It's going global when we look at the distribution.
Tens of thousands of listens on the podcast. He's always a very popular guest.
Then we've got, after him, Paul Hales is the fire safety lead in Canary Wharf, and they recently did an exercise with London Fire Brigade, which was, the scenario was an EV fire subsurface car park, and lessons learned. So he's going to be coming back and giving us feedback from that major exercise that they undertook recently. So
that'd be interesting.
It'll be the first time that they fed back on that, which is going to be really interesting. After that, we've got a presentation by the National Association of Air Ductwork Specialists. We were talking about this earlier on. So it's fire safety issues with dampers in high-rise buildings. So fire dampers, completely essential for stopping smoke and fire travel through buildings, whether it be that they're spring-loaded or motor-activated. I'm a huge fan that's a pun, isn't it? Of motorised actuators linked to a fire detection system, as opposed to a fusible link and a spring. So for your listeners, you'll know that in the ductwork there will be dampers, and these are devices that will shut in the event of fire. Now, mostly they are either fusible link, which will operate on temperature, or they'll be linked to the fire detection system, and they'll be motored shut by a motorised actuator. And we have a fairly low take-up in this country of motorised actuators, where in other parts of Europe they only really use motorised actuators.
So just to expand on that, so for people that are unsure with some of the terminology, think of a set of blinds on your windows. That's like the dampeners. So the difference being, if it's temperature actuated, there's almost a biometallic element sometimes in them, whereby when it reaches a certain temperature, it will trigger it and it will close the blinds effectively within there, stopping smoke spread. But the problem is, you already had a great deal of smoke that would have passed through that under a lower temperature.
Correct.
Before the point at which it's actuated on the heat element of it. Whereas if it's linked to the fire detection, then the area of origin where that detector has gone off, it will close the vents, close the dampeners further down to stop what has already been fire spread entering that ventilation.
Yeah, and of course, if it has actuated, I'm talking about the fusible link type, is it condition monitored? It probably isn't, so you probably don't know that. It's not linked to the building management system, the BMS, it's probably not linked to that, so it can shut.
Yeah.
Classic one of that was the MGM fire in Las Vegas, where the dampers were closing because it was such high ambient temperatures. And the case study that I saw is that the maintenance people actually took screws and screwed the dampers open so they wouldn't shut.
Fantastic.
After that, Sam Bryant from OFR. Now Sam is going to be she did some research on balcony fires and fire safety related issues to balconies, because we know the balconies are getting bigger. They're becoming your alternative front room in the summer. They sit out there in the city.
Everyone's getting a pizza oven and a grill.
Well, then a long-standing friend of the conference, Professor Guillermo Rain from Imperial College, who's got a number of PhDs working on high-rise fire safety issues. So he's going to be doing a report back on where they are with their current research. Then into the afternoon session, Tom Roche is a senior fire engineer for FM Global, the world's biggest insurance company. And he's going to be, his session's called What the Insurer Thinks. So that'll be, again, a good perspective to come from. And then we've got two colleagues from Frankfurt Fire Service in Germany. And they're going to be talking about how the Frankfurt Fire Service responded to the Grenfell Tower fire and what they've done in Frankfurt since the fire. So that's going to be interesting. Michael Kinsey is going to be doing a session on elevator or lift safety. So he's done a PhD in lift and elevator safety, fire safety. So it is an ongoing theme about what we're going to do about lifts and how we use lifts and elevators going forward and their role, etc. So that's going to be good.
They have their ups and downs, don't they?
Ding.
Sorry, I couldn't stop myself. It's just right in front of me. That
lastly, and fingers crossed that this is going to happen, Jason Hull is a UK firefighter living in Kyiv in Ukraine. He's married to a Ukrainian lady. He came to our conference this year and he did a session which is high-rise firefighting in a war zone. And you could have heard a pin drop when he gave his presentation. And I'm hoping that he's going to be able to travel to London for December to do the same thing. But one of the things that he was saying is that the first responders now are being deliberately targeted by the Russians. So they'll send a drone into a high-rise and then they'll wait 25 minutes and they'll send a second drone into exactly the same spot. So, you know, they've suffered a lot of firefighter fatalities, which is deliberate.
If you're trying to bomb that building to burn it down, the last thing you want is someone coming in to put it out.
If we get time on the third day, I will try and get as many of the international firefighters around a table and we'll have a question time, but it all depends on timing because there's quite a lot to get in there. So that's the 3 days. I've tried to keep them down fairly short, but hopefully you can tell that it's going to be a fairly intense 3 days. It's going to be a very eclectic range of subjects we're going to talk about, and I'm hoping everybody's going to learn it. But at least one of the nights we are being invited to a reception, so you know, the best work.
Some food and drink.
With a beer in your hand where you'll get to meet all the other people. And we are, as we sit here today on the 3rd of October, we are 160 booked to attend.
Wow.
So our target is around the 200 mark.
So there's not many spaces left for people that are interested in going. If they want to go, we're going to drop some links in below this. So there is some different rates, isn't there, depending on where people are coming from?
Yes. So we have obviously the full delegate rate. We have a heavily discounted rate for serving firefighters. And at the moment, we've got something like 14 of the UK fire services are attending.
Nice.
Sending representatives. There's a few of those left.
There needs to be a lot more than that, in my personal opinion.
We've got a few of those left because they're limited to 50 spaces. I think we've got about 6 or 7 spaces left.
Wow, okay.
If you are a member of the IFE, the IFSM, then there is also discounted tickets available if you're a member of those organisations. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting as many people in the room as possible from as wide a background as possible. We are in the process of getting the CPD signed off with the IFE, so you'll get, over the course of the 3 days, you'll get something like 18 hours of CPD. So if that's needed for what you're doing, then I mean I think it's essential. But obviously,
well, it helps people get it across the line with their services sometimes as well to justify the cost, which is a real shame because I'll be going there in my personal time because I'm just one of those saddos that has a real tremendous interest in it. But I'm really, really looking forward to it, mate. I'm going to be there for the whole thing, and we're going to be grabbing conversations with you, a number of the speakers, possibly joining in some roundtables, just so that we can truly maximise the output from this incredible group of people that you've managed to get together. I'm really looking forward to it, brother. This is going to go out in October, and we're going to try and turn this around really, really quick for people to be able to jump straight on it and book in, or at least make themselves in attendance in the general area if they can't manage to get themselves a ticket. But I think it's going to be an incredible event, brother. Is there any low-hanging fruit? Is there any final pieces we need to leave in the ears of the listener before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think as we grapple with the phase 2 report from Grenfell Tower, there's lots of people that are trying to establish, what is the way forward, and I'm hoping that they may get some answers from this event, and that may assist them as we go forward now and try and implement those. Is it 56 recommendations that came out of that? So there's a lot of work to be done, and if we can get people together and they can say, well, we do it this way. You might learn from that. Plagiarism with pride. If somebody's got a good solution, then let's share that. Let's not try.
Yeah, we were taught in school not to copy each other, but it's a silly idea because actually you don't have to do the work twice, and there's a lot of services and a lot of brigades struggling to find answers. A lot of organisations, a lot of buildings, they haven't got to reinvent the wheel. A lot of this best practice is being done internationally.
We've got a common purpose, so hopefully this will facilitate that. So like you, I'm looking forward to it.
100%, brother. Thanks so much for your time today, Russ. I always love talking to you, mate, and I will see you in a couple of months.
Great.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognise, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.